Last week, the Seahawks were a mash unit on defense, but things look to be trending in a better direction on the injury front going into week 5. We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on a beautiful Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're tuning in from Spokane, Washington with the new Pac-12 Gonzaga Bulldogs, or you are in Rochester, New York. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Just like we do every single Friday with a Blue Friday. Look, I'm going to answer this question before we start the show. There's been a lot of questions about with the Seahawks having their retro jerseys twice this year, can they wear their greens? Yes, they can. The jerseys they got rid of were the wolf gray ones. And thank goodness, in my opinion, those are the ones they got rid of. So they will be able to wear green jerseys twice this year if they wish. Let's get to the serious content now. We are almost to week 5, Seahawks and Giants in Lumen Field, back home. Seahawks looking to bounce back from that tough loss on the road on Monday night against the Lions. We're going to have a game plan for victory, picks to click, our weekly game predictions, and much more. Courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Last week, for more than half of the game on Monday Night Football, the Seahawks were missing 5 starters on the defensive side of the football. You don't want to make any excuses, and you can't make excuses in the NFL, but they were decimated by injuries. If you're looking for some better news coming into week 5, however, you may just get that better news. Yesterday, the Thursday injury report looking much more optimistic for the Seahawks. Byron Murphy II being the only player that was out with an injury. Doesn't look like he is going to be back after missing last week's game. Probably going to miss at least one more game. He might not even be ready for the Thursday night game against the 49ers. But, Nick, the good news is that defensive line, Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe, and Uchenna Nwosu were all limited on Thursday, and all of them look to be trending to be able to play on Sunday. We'll find out later today whether that's truly the case. Probably some questionable designations coming our way, but still, there's got to be some excitement about getting a number of those key cogs back on the defensive line.
Well, first of all, greetings from Seaside, Oregon on a hot spot. So I apologize in advance if it's a little spotty. So the word I used against the Lions was outgunned. The Seahawks were just outgunned. I mean, they had some guns, they got some shots fired, but they just didn't have all the horses. And looking like it's going to be a little bit better. Of course, Byron Murphy being out for possibly a bit more extended period is a bummer. But I think I'm kind of looking at it as you're also getting Uchenna Nwosu back. Leonard Williams continues to practice as well. And Boye Mafe, would be those, I mean, you just could tell they were just absolutely outgunned on defense against this. And it's not just the fact that they were outgunned or they were down a couple of guys, Corbin, but they also were facing one of, if not the most, high motor offenses in the NFL right now in the Detroit Lions. That won't exactly be the case against the New York Giants. I do not consider the Giants offense and the Detroit Lions offense to be in the same tier right now, shocking as that may be. So right now you have, of course, Julian Love was another one, a big loss last week. He's been upgraded to full participant. So really, if you can get it to where Byron Murphy's the only real player that's out, fully for this game for sure, you get, maybe Uchenna Nwosu, Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe, Terrell Dodson, Julian Love all back. I mean, really, Mike McDonald had one hand to hide time behind his back on Monday nights. I mean, there's only so much you can do with so many of those starters out. And if you get a lot of those guys back, you're facing an offense that is not quite as high-powered as the Lions, and you're at home in Seattle. I think there's a lot more going Seattle's way. I think I'm confident with the injuries, with the Seahawks healing up on defense, with some of the matchups and it being at home, they're going to make that defensive performance in Detroit look more and more like an anomaly.
Yeah, and that's going to be a game that we might end up putting an asterisk next to when we get later in the season. And I know, again, you can't make excuses, but I agree with you. And this is why when Rob and I were talking earlier this week about whether this game on Monday was a setback or has a chance to still be a positive step forward, I argued step forward just because the injuries on defense. I think a lot of the communication issues, the players were never going to acknowledge this, but it felt like the communication issues they were having in the second half, a lot of it had to do with the guys that were out. Julian Love, him exiting middle of the game, I think played a huge role in that problem. So getting him back as a full participant, big deal. Leonard Williams, these former Giants are going to want to play against their former team. And the chance to do it at Lumen Field, get back in the win column, go to 4-1. There's no such thing as an easy win in the NFL. But this Giants offense is not the juggernaut that the Detroit Lions are, especially considering they've got the biggest couple injuries maybe of either team going into this game. And we now know Malik Neighbors, the front runner for Offensive Rookie of the Year, will not suit up on Sunday. He is still in concussion protocol, so he is not going to be able to play. That is a huge loss for the Giants, who, quite frankly, Nick, they have not had a number 2 receiver for Daniel Jones for most of his career, let alone a number 1. Neighbors has been a transformational addition for that offense, but they're not going to have him. And honestly, I'm disappointed. I know that Seahawks fans are going to be saying, hey, why are you disappointed? Their best player can't play. You want to beat the best that teams can offer. And so there's disappointment there. And I would have loved to see Malik Neighbors against Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. That would have been a get your popcorn ready matchup. But we're not going to be seeing that in this game. The other thing that I'm curious about, and we've talked about this a little bit this week earlier on an earlier episode, but the Seahawks have 2 games in 5 days coming up. And obviously that Thursday night game, the San Francisco 49ers coming to Lumen Field, is the biggest game to date and maybe the biggest game on the entire schedule. The Seahawks are going to be looking to show we are the favorite to win the NFC West. The 49ers are going to look to say, not so fast, my friend. I mean, that is a huge game. I wonder how much that ends up playing into the thought process here. Do we play Leonard Williams? Do we bring Uchenna Nwosu back for this game? Do we bring back Boye Mafe? I'm assuming some of these guys are going to play on Sunday against the Giants, but I would not be shocked, Nick, if a few of these guys, the Seahawks, ultimately decide, yeah, if we did have a game coming up on Thursday, we would absolutely play you, but we're going to err on the side of caution to make sure you can play against San Francisco on Thursday night. And the Seahawks, I don't think, will publicly say that if that's behind the decision-making process, but behind closed doors that those discussions are happening right now.
Yeah, it's fair to wonder, especially, you're never going to say, oh, yeah, we should be able to beat the Giants without so-so and so-and-so. I mean, we've seen throughout, if you have Red Zone, if you've been paying attention to the league, there are some wild results out there. Some teams have been looking like Super Bowl contenders one week, and all of a sudden they look like they could go 0-17 the next week. So it's unpredictable. You do not want to assume any wins. You don't want to consider this win banked and resting guys for that 49ers game. There is a little bit of give and take with that for sure. So if it in the spirit of, hey, maybe 1 or 2 guys, if you give it an extra few days, it's really going to make a difference against the 49ers, sure. But certainly it should not be in the spirit of, oh, we got the Giants game in the bag. We don't need to do this. We don't need to go full strength. We can operate at less than full strength against the Giants and win this game without them, just to make sure we're full strength for the 49ers. I don't think that's quite the correct approach, just because it's the NFL. Professional football players are all over the Giants roster. So that's a careful thread or needle to thread, or however you want to say that. But yeah, it's certainly a question worth asking. Maybe 1 or 2 of those players, if 3 or 4 days would make a big difference, then yes, do it.
Yeah, that's really what it's going to boil down to. If you don't think that they're going to, or they don't need to have those extra few days to really turn the corner, then play them on Sunday, because you don't want to take any opponent lightly. It just does these schedule dynamics, especially when they had a Monday night game instead of a Sunday game to start it off. I mean, 3 games in 10 days. That is an incredibly tall order for an NFL team. So the Seahawks have had to do a balancing act. And I do believe that a few of these guys might have played on Monday if they didn't have 2 games coming up in 5 days. I think there would have been more more thought about potentially letting a few of those guys go against the Lions. But I think this schedule, absolutely, it's early in the season. You got to keep your guys healthy. You got to protect them from themselves. So I'm interested to see what the Seahawks do in this game against the New York Giants with all these injured players still working their way back. When we come back, Seahawks Giants coming up. It's time for our weekly game plan on offense, defense. What does Mike McDonald's team need to do to get back in the win column as the favorite against the Giants at Lumen Field? We'll be taking a deep dive coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, it's just you against the numbers. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform that offers an injury insurance policy so your lineups can stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's LOCKEDONNFL. On Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined on today's show from Seaside, Oregon, Nick Lee. A special thanks to all the 12s, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the new Locked On NFL. It is now 2 shows every day. First, you got the madman Tyler Rowland kicking the morning off with a double shot of NFL Espresso. And then make sure to stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. The Seahawks looking to get back in the win column and heading back home to Lumen Field to face the New York Giants on Sunday. 6.5-point favorites. At least that's where the line was at before the Malik Neighbors news came out. I will not be shocked if that actually goes up a little bit for the Seahawks with Neighbors being out of this football game. But for now, 6.5-point favorites playing at home in week 5. When you look at a game like this, the term trap around, and the way that I'm looking at this contest, Nick, particularly in the offensive side of the football, when we do these game plan segments, sometimes you try to really dig deep to find what are some things that we see on film that we can absolutely do to attack specific coverages or whatever. But there are certain games where you've just got to say, we are the better team. Let's do what we do well, because they are not going to be able to combat it. And it feels like the deep ball in this game in particular. Obviously, you got to protect Geno Smith, but the matchups on the outside, this is the worst secondary the Seahawks have played by a pretty wide margin, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the things I like to look at is where's the rat. That's kind of the phraseology we've been using on the defense. And right now, that's been Deontay Banks, the corner. He's allowed the 6th most receiving yards among all defensive backs in the league so far, tied for the most touchdowns allowed in the league. So to quote the great Witch King of Lord of the Rings, the Ring Wraith, feast on his flesh. Metaphorically, of course. DK Metcalf and those guys need to metaphorically feast on the flesh of that secondary. I mean, it's just going to be the talent gap is extremely wide in that room. So yeah, take those deep shots. And I don't even say I would maybe not even go as far as pick your spots. I would go be aggressive and find those windows, because you saw it against the Dolphins. I was like, you blinked against the Dolphins and they had that deep shot with DK Metcalf. I mean, DK's got that deep ball skill, and it's not just DK. And these talk about being outgunned. This defensive secondary for the New York Giants are extremely outgunned with the talent the Seahawks have at receiver. Take advantage of that. And I think you can couple that with a run game. And I was looking at just some of the run directions. The last 3 games, the team playing the Giants has had the most success rushing to the interior right side, like right guard area. And so can Connor Williams and Christian Haynes and or Anthony Bradford take care of that and take advantage? Raheem Nunez-Roches, the defensive tackle for the Giants, has been poor against the run in that spot. And Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence have been solid. You want to run away from them. Maybe if you can take advantage of other places. You don't need to scheme away from them, but there are other places along this defensive line for the Giants where you can really exploit and create an advantage for yourself. And that, of course, will neutralize what I think is their best and perhaps only strength at this point is their defensive line for New York. They have a really solid defensive line. You can neutralize that by attacking, the weak points in the run defense. And really that can neutralize any sort of pass rush they could have as well.
And I also look at it from this standpoint, Nick. If you're using PFF grades, the Giants linebackers have actually scored really well. Micah McFadden's got a 90 overall grade right now. But when you turn on the tape, you see missed tackles. And they've got missed tackles from their other linebackers as well. It feels like a game if you can get that between the tackle run game going some and get your running backs, Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet, on those linebackers where they have to come up and they have to make tackles between the tackles. That may be easier said than done, especially playing on the road. So I do think the run game, we have not seen Ryan Grubb emphasize play action very much, which has kind of surprised me. That's been the one thing that I've been a little bit disappointed by, but they have been so up and down with how they've ran the ball. Or there's been games like Monday where it's like, we're not even going to try to run the ball the first half because we're already playing catch up. We need to sling the ball over the yard. And it was successful for the Seahawks. They made it work. But I would like to see this be a game where you can get that between the tackles running game, particularly the right side. Whoever's playing next to Dexter Lawrence, they've got a few other decent defensive linemen, but there's a big drop off there. If you can take advantage of that and play Christian Haynes, please, more than you did last week, get him going downhill some, use that athleticism, get to the linebackers. If they can get that run game going, I think the play action passing game is going to open up. And look, this is a new theme on Locked On Seahawks. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but the other key to me, mix in some screens and draws because the Seahawks can actually run them. Like last week, they ran a tunnel screen. That might have been one of my 3 favorite plays in that game from the Seahawks because Ryan Grubb had Laviska Shenault motion out to the slot, and then he took a couple jab steps before coming back inside on the tunnel, and it was just perfectly executed. We've seen a few other screens hit. Use the aggressiveness of Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau against them. These guys are both players that want to get upfield. They want to get screaming off the edge and get after the quarterback. Make those guys pay with a few quick screens. We haven't really seen the running back screen emphasized much. I think this is a game that you may have success. And also, Micah McFadden and the rest of the Giants linebackers, getting them in space could work to your advantage with some of their tackling issues. So I'm making an argument that this is a game that screens can absolutely be a big part of the game plan. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the football now for the Seahawks. And Nick, you mentioned it. This is not a juggernaut, especially without Malik Neighbors being available. You don't want to take anyone lightly, but it does feel like this is one of those games where you absolutely want to put the ball in Daniel Jones' court and say, beat me.
Absolutely. And he has shown flashes of the ability to do that. But I'd say it's more on the other side of things. Sprinkle in exotic blitzes in timely moments because we were talking before the show and I said, hey, maybe, his numbers against the blitz aren't great. But also they don't have Malik Neighbors. And so you were saying, hey, let's pick our spots because the Seahawks could really sit back and rush 4 or 5 and let the defensive backs, because again, talk about another talent gap on the other side of things in the passing game, the defensive backs for the Seahawks. There's a giant talent gap without Malik Neighbors there. I mean, the wide receivers for the Giants right now without Malik Neighbors, it's like a create a player Madden AI generator. I couldn't tell you, who's who with the Giants receivers besides Malik Neighbors. And so that the talent of the defensive backs should shine through. And really that's going to make it so where you can be a bit more creative on defense. You certainly don't want to let Daniel Jones get any sort of comfortable. If you can't just line up and show him what you're doing all the time because he's still a fairly competent quarterback when things like that get rolling. But, sprinkle in some exotic looks. But really, you don't have to go crazy to try, you don't have to kind of expend an exorbitant amount of energy to try and beat Daniel Jones because at one, you like what you have with the pass rush, I think, and especially with the guys getting healthy. And two, he's just not one of those guys that's going to make that extra play to elevate a team. In fact, the opposite. Daniel Jones is prone to the extra critical mistake to sink his team.
Yeah, and that's the point that needs to be made here is that on one hand, we saw the Seahawks have a lot of success in New York against Daniel Jones last year, just rushing their front four. They had some success blitzing. Devin Witherspoon had, I believe, 2 sacks in that game. He was player of the week in the NFC. He had a pick 6 in that game as well. But this is a game where you got to pick and choose when you're going to do that because it feels like they should be able, especially if you get Nwosu, Mafe, and Williams all back this week, you're going to be near full strength. Let those guys get after it in the trenches and let the front create the pressure. And then Daniel Jones now has to deal with 7 guys dropping back in coverage instead of, say, 5 or 6. And the windows are not going to be there. They're going to be much smaller. Last week, the Seahawks were really trying to mix in those blitzes out of necessity against the Lions. And with all the new players that were out there playing together, then there were communication breakdowns. There were coverage busts. Maybe one safety blitzing that wasn't supposed to blitz on certain touchdown play for 70 yards. Those kind of mistakes. You're hoping getting guys back that is not going to happen this week. So I do think you want to mix some of those in because you want to keep Daniel Jones off balance. He's a smart guy, and he will make some boneheaded decisions if you force him into those with some extra pressure. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're not overdoing the blitz because you should be able to rush 4. I mean, they had 11 sacks against this team last year, and it's mostly the same offensive line. And Seattle's arguably a better defensive front than they were at this time last year. Not that I'm expecting them to replicate that performance, but you can get pressure on Daniel Jones without blitzing a bunch, but pick your times to send those extra pressures, to send extra guys, the sim pressures as well. And last but not least for me, when we're looking at defensive keys for this game, we've talked about bottling up that run game. Daniel Jones on his own. This is one of those games, Nick, where you've got to be really careful with your pass rushing assignments because you don't want to get too deep downfield. Daniel Jones, even coming off an ACL tear, the rushing numbers are not great this year. 23 carries, I believe, for 70 yards. He has not had a lot of success running the football, but he is one of the more dynamic running quarterbacks in the league when he is able to get going. He can step up in the pocket. He can take off and run over guys. We've seen him do that in the past. Don't give him those opportunities. This is a game where you want to be aggressive rushing the quarterback at the same time. I'm going to say you want to be cautiously aggressive. You want to make sure that you're not getting too far downfield to create those little creases for Daniel Jones to escape and either extend plays to throw the ball or take off and run. So to me, that is also a huge key anytime you play the New York Giants.
Well, that and also, we talked about this against the Dolphins without Tua. You want to let a team, an underdog, hang around at your house. Let him convert a 3rd and 11 on a scramble, or let him get out in space and create with his feet. When you have everything else beaten, you have the offense beaten, but yet his legs allow for a big conversion in a big spot. That's how you let a team like the Giants hang around. Hopefully, if that does happen again, his biggest enemy of his arch enemy of his life is the wide open field, 50 yards without any other defender near him, because that's where he trips. I have to bring that up every time because it's just one of the funniest things ever. But yeah, so you don't let him, bottle up the run game. Devin Singletary, I know that the health status there is uncertain. And also don't let Daniel Jones also keep that going. Do not let him extend drives with his feet.
When we come back, it's time for Picks to Click. And of course, our weekly game predictions. We'll get to those coming up next year on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring a touchdown against the Giants on Sunday, or Noah Fant being the first player to get a 30-yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com today and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Blue Friday edition. Hard to believe, but we're already in week 5. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s who were listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks still atop the NFC West, but only one game ahead of the 49ers now. They're going to be looking to bounce back from their first loss of the season. Standing in their way, the New York Giants, who are desperate in their own right after a dismal 1-3 start. These two teams will tangle at Lumen Field on Sunday. Let's get to our weekly picks to click. I'm feeling really good about my pick to click on offense from last week. I believe, trying to remember who I even picked on the defensive side of the football last week. I had DK Metcalf. I'm thinking I had Derek Hall on defense, if I remember correctly. But Derek Hall had a sack. So I'm feeling pretty good about my picks. Let's get to the picks to click now for week 5, Nick. Who are you rolling with on the offensive side of the football?
Well, with those two picks, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. So I think for me, I'm going to go DK Metcalf. I'm going to go with the guy who has 3 straight 100-yard games, who has fared fairly well against the Giants in his career. And like we've talked about, the Giants' corners really are just not impressive. And the widest talent gap in this game, I believe, is the wide receivers for the Seahawks against the defensive backs for the Giants. And I think DK Metcalf and company will feast on that. And I expect a big game from him, especially, if there's any sort of semblance of the Seahawks not being able to run the ball. Ryan Grubb has shown the ability to adjust and go through the air. And I think that spells well for DK Metcalf. You know what? I'm calling my shot. He gets another 50-plus yard touchdown, like 50-plus yard reception into a touchdown.
I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett for my pick to click, the old standby. And here's my argument. I mean, Lockett has had a good, not great season because he's kind of become the third target at the receiving group. But Adoree Jackson is banged up. The Giants could be down to their third string nickel cornerback in this game. And they already have struggled when they've had those guys, the first 2 in the lineup. So I look at this matchup, like you said, there is a massive gap in talent when you're looking at Seahawks receivers against the Giants secondary. DK is going to get his plays, but I feel like 3 straight 100-yard games, the Giants are going to try to dedicate some extra support, which you're playing with fire if you decide to do that, because now you have ideal one-on-one situations for Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett. I like Lockett here with the matchups he's going to get both on the boundary and when he moves inside of the slot. I actually am calling the first 100-yard game this year for Tyler Lockett. He has historically played well against the New York Giants. I think he is overdue for one of those games. And it's been so long since he's had a long splash play of his own. I'm expecting that he's going to have a 40-plus yard catch in this game and score his first touchdown. So he's my pick to click on offense for the Seahawks. Let's go to the defensive side of the football. And again, imitation apparently is the greatest form of flattery. You just, because of my success, steal my picks to click for this week.
Well, I mean, they work so well, so for most of the part. So I'm going to go with Derek Hall. Absolutely. You in a tweet called him the third or the top 3 athlete on the roster for the Seahawks, and it's hard for me to disagree with that. First of all, and he's second on the team in pressures. He currently leads the team with 4 sacks, and I like the matchups with the offensive line for the Giants. I mean, we got Jermaine Illuminor, the right tackle, who has allowed 4 quarterback hits, which when you compare the 2 offensive, I like that you can sort on Pro Football Focus just the 2 offensive lines together. He leads the group of Giants and Seahawks offensive linemen and quarterback hits allowed. So I like that matchup. If you get Derek Hall bouncing around, I think he can just out-athlete this offensive line and create some havoc.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a familiar face for Giants fans. Julian Love coming off that injury scare last week. He's a full participant, so he's good to go. I think this is a game where his old buddy Daniel Jones is going to try to test the Seahawks downfield, and Julian Love is going to bait him with some pre- and post-snap disguising, and I think he's going to get his first interception of the season. I think Julian Love picks off his former team. I'm looking for him to get a bunch of tackles too, and that doesn't mean that the Giants are getting big runs necessarily. I just think Julian Love is going to be moving around enough that he's going to be able to fly downhill and get some tackles in this game as well. So interception, quite a few tackles for Julian Love. I think he's going to make I guess you could say Giants fans would say that would be a disheartening impression, seeing their former player have a really good performance. But I think he's going to bounce back from missing that second half on Monday night in Detroit and have a really good game for the Seahawks. Let's get to our predictions now. And you have remained undefeated because you picked the Lions to win. I picked the Seahawks to beat the Lions on Monday night. So you now have a 1-game advantage. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to really create a tie again, because I think you and I are probably going to be on the same page here.
Yeah, we might need to look at a margin of victory as a tiebreaker eventually. So I did worry. Shout out again to my favorite college football podcast, The Solid Verbal, Dan and Ty. They talk about this concept of a lit down look ahead sandwich, which is basically a team coming off of a heart wrenching loss. They have a really big game coming up and this trap game in the middle, and that's kind of where the Seahawks are at with the Giants here. They have that disheartening loss in Detroit. They got the big Thursday night game against the Niners coming up, and here are the Giants that might come to spoil the party. I did worry about that, but then no Malik Neighbors. It's in Seattle. You look down the line of like who's got the advantage. Quarterback, Seattle. Running back without Singletary, certainly Seattle. Receivers, too easy. Offensive line, maybe a wash. Defensive line, Seahawks, I think, has the advantage if they're fully healthy. Linebackers might be a wash. Defensive backs, easily advantage for the Seahawks. So in my book, that could spell a 2-score win for the Seahawks at home. Absolutely. This game would be disastrous to lose given the advantages the Seahawks have had with also the game coming up against the Niners. So I'm going to go Seahawks 30, Giants 17.
I just can't see Mike McDonald letting this team come out flat and have a letdown off Monday's game. And I don't think the players are going to accept that either. I think they're looking at this as an opportunity. Hey, let's get momentum back going before we play the 49ers. Let's not limp into that game losing 2 consecutive games, especially second one we shouldn't have lost. And Malik Neighbors being out is a massive deal. The Giants offense has looked totally different with him out there. Not that they've been a juggernaut, but they actually can throw the football downfield. I don't know that they're going to be able to do that much in this game with the receivers they're going to have without Malik Neighbors. I feel like the pass rush is going to come to life for the Seahawks. The Giants are averaging under 3.7 yards per carry in the run game. So if Seattle can't stop their run game, especially without Devin Singletary likely to play, if they can't stop their run game this week, then I think we have a legitimate, what could be an Achilles heel for this football team that keeps them from winning this division. But this is a game to get right with your run defense. And I think the offense, the way they were humming in Detroit, I think Geno Smith's going to come out slinging it. I think the run game is going to be able to get some traction going, but Geno's going to want to get that victory with a bunch of points on the board. And I think Geno's going to throw 3 touchdowns in this game. In fact, I think he's going to nearly equal his season total. I think this is a great matchup for him and the receivers. I just think the Giants, you mentioned the Seahawks being outgunned. I think the Giants are absolutely outgunned in this game. So I'm going to go 35-16. Maybe the Giants keep it kind of close early, but I think the Seahawks are going to create separation fairly early in this game, and they're going to coast to a victory before they have to face the 49ers on Thursday Night Football. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLeaf51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We'll be coming back on Sunday with our post-game show. Join Connor Benintendi and I as we dish out our game balls, 3 up, 3 down, break down key storylines, and hopefully we'll be diving into a Seahawks victory. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and enjoy the game on Sunday. Go Hawks.